What's up, people? Today's question is, ex-convicts, what crimes were respected in prison and which were the most hated? Story 1. I am a lawyer with several friends who work as prison guards in the northeastern United States. Crimes involving significant violence earn you respect in prison, meaning people will leave you alone. Smart crimes are also respected, like pulling off a successful scam or being a major player in the drug trade. In those cases, people will likely want to befriend you. On the other hand, if you're in for minor drug dealing, petty theft, illegal possession of a firearm, or any other minor offense, you're considered a nobody. Child predators are kept separated from the rest because they are absolute targets. In summary, if your crime involves harming women or children, you're going to have a terrible time. Story 2. I've never been to prison personally, but I speak on behalf of my parents, who have been in and out. Not all crimes are necessarily respected, but crimes like major theft or counterfeiting money are seen as impressive by other inmates, making it easier to get along with them. On the other hand, child predators and those who exploit minors are despised to the point that they are placed in separate prison units. If a child predator were placed in the general population, they would likely get stabbed, or worse. Even though most inmates are in for committing crimes, they still despise the most vile offenders. Anything involving children makes you the #1 target for the most dangerous prison gangs. Story 3. A friend of mine went in for 3 robberies, but what landed him in prison was assaulting a police officer. After he got out, he said prison wasn't that hard. He also mentioned that most inmates will look up your charges in the prison library if they don't believe you, or just to verify your sentence. If you lie about why you're in there, you're either screwed or dead, according to him. Story 4. I'm not an ex-convict, but I have relatives who are. The inmates who usually get killed as soon as they enter prison are snitches, rapists, child molesters, and those who harm women or kids. I'm probably missing some crimes, but those offenders are definitely not respected. On the flip side, there are crimes that inmates admire, such as killing rival gang members, high-level drug trafficking, and large-scale distribution. To verify your charges, inmates will demand your paperwork, a form listing the reason for your incarceration. It's common for inmates to investigate your background and demand to see this paperwork within the first few days. Different prisons have different rules, but this is a widespread practice. Story 5. Crimes against children are considered the lowest and most inhumane. Inmates convicted of sexual crimes live in constant fear because anyone could decide to take justice into their own hands. Even prison staff sometimes inform other inmates about sex offenders so that someone can deal with them. The severity of crimes in prison depends on multiple factors, but harming children is universally hated. Story 6. In prison, it really doesn't matter why you're there, as long as you don't have charges related to children and you don't cooperate with authorities to inform on others in exchange for benefits, sentences, or privileges. Prisoners almost always ask for your paperwork, so don't lie about your charges. Let the police know during intake if you're a delinquent or a chum, to be isolated from the other inmates. If you refuse to show your documents, the inmates will send emails asking for help to investigate your case and charges. In prison, there are groups, and these groups usually have a leader. Most of the leaders have phones and can find out what you did without relying on coded emails. Before phone smuggling became widespread and corrupted most of the police, you had to make phone calls or email requests for your people on the outside to investigate someone. You must show your documents to eat and associate with others in prison, because if you don't adapt to a group, you'll be a constant target for the rest. Usually, the same groups will look for you to understand your situation, ask for your paperwork, and if you haven't done something really bad and you're not despised by them, they tend to recruit you to strengthen their influence and power over other groups. They typically want you in their group if you're of the same race or belong to a gang, but if you hide your documents, everyone will think the worst of you. In fact, you'll become a target for every group that wants to exploit someone they perceive as weak. The bottom line is this: if you don't have friends in prison, you have no idea how to survive or play the game. Even if you're convicted for killing someone who entered your house and argued with your wife, no one really cares about your past once you're established in prison, unless you have charges related to children. If you do, you'd better make sure not to end up where people like that end up. I've seen degenerates violently attacked while the guards took their time to respond. I've seen police leave these degenerates in the general yard with the rest of the inmates just to see how they get destroyed. Maybe it was because the abuser was disrespectful during intake, or just someone who was doing their job got fooled. It's also worth noting that once your experience in prison is evaluated, your survival will depend on your communication skills, patience, tolerance, and knowing how to avoid explosive situations. Story 7. The murderers and child abusers are at the top of the hate list worldwide. The guards, the prisoners, everyone will have you in their sights, and you won't be able to do anything about it. Guards will respond more slowly to incidents when they know a degenerate is involved. The only crime that commands respect is when someone is the leader of a mafia or criminal group, with exaggerated power and influence outside. In reality, the only real respect you earn is for the crimes you commit while you're there. That's why prisoners are so interested in attacking the most sick and despised individuals, because the more beatings they dish out and the more crimes they commit inside, the more respect they gain. It's like a way for them to increase their social status within those centers. Story 8. I asked a friend who has been in prison since I don't have experience, and this is what he said. Besides child abusers, who are universally despised, in general, you're not respected for your crime, but for how you behave. If you stay away from conflict, remain calm, and respect others, in the end, you'll receive the same in return. In most cases, you just need to be prepared to defend yourself. The only people who are really hated are child abusers, murderers of minors, sexual criminals, and snitches. Although it really depends on the state and the institution. In my state, those who abuse the elderly, mentally disabled, or anyone considered vulnerable and unprotected are also dead as soon as they enter their cell. The other inmates will take care of them quickly, they just ask for the paperwork. Story 9. From my experience being in confined spaces with criminals and alleged criminals, the obvious crimes were severely hated, such as abuse, sexual assault, or violence against women or children. People involved in cases like these were either separated or completely isolated, because violence in prison is a tool used to position yourself in front of other criminals, groups, and gangs. When I was in, I had no crime on my record, and I was really respected. During my time there, I only knew of one case where someone gained respect for a shooting. It was a hardworking man who had his life together, 3 kids, a house, a job. A guy who had worked hard in life to provide the best for his children and wife. He found out his wife was cheating on him, and he emptied an entire magazine into the chest of the guy who was with her wife. He was respected for that. He joked so much about it that people surrounded him to listen because he was actually funny. He made a lot of jokes about it. You can imagine, he had a talent for telling stories in a charismatic and entertaining way. It seemed like he was born to be a stand-up comedian with the way he told his story, and you could tell from his tone that he was a good guy who had been pushed to extreme circumstances that led him to that situation. And I guarantee you that absolutely no one could mess with him, despite not belonging to any gang or group. I know this is a highly unlikely exception, but for some reason, he was popular in prison. He got along with everyone, and to be honest, I even liked him because he was the kindest person I've ever met. Story 10. I've spent quite some time in prison, and I know for a fact that sexual crimes are the worst crimes you can have. If you have a sexual offense, you basically have a green light for inmates to target you. Even in protective custody, sexual criminals and thugs get stabbed and quickly taken out of the picture. In the best-case scenario, they get beaten up daily without being killed. Additionally, any crime involving children is considered the worst. Charges related to putting a child in danger can get you killed. Obviously, sexual crimes involving a child or any violence against a child directly put your life in danger. Then, the crimes that earn the most respect among inmates are things like bank robberies, murder, and extortion of politicians or people known to be corrupt. Many scammers are also respected, especially those caught with large amounts of money or illegal substances. Story 11. I have a friend who constantly ends up in jail for really absurd things, like graffiti, but he always seems to be pretty well liked. When he's in jail, he just draws with whatever he has at hand, and when people get curious, he draws whatever the groups or his cellmates ask for. From what I've been told, many people want self-portraits. The guy seems to have more friends in prison than he does outside. What a loose cannon. Story 12. In the prison I was in, terrorism was the most despised crime. A guy responsible for multiple deaths in an attack, unfortunately, somehow avoided being beaten to death because he was transferred to a facility where he was isolated from the general population. In my opinion, he should have been placed with the rest so they could handle him properly. Story 13. In Australia, generally speaking, murderers were respected, although the crime itself wasn't. Crimes involving substances were in an intermediate category. The crime itself was respected, but the criminal was not. If you were a degenerate or involved in crimes against children, you'd be sent to protective custody. If you were in the general population, people would turn on you. In Australia, the term used for informants is dog, which meant you'd be thrown out and treated as badly as a child abuser. As a result, prisons for protective custody and segregated inmates were called dog houses, where all the dogs were sent. Story 14. From my experience, many types of fraud are generally acceptable as long as the victims are large corporations or the government. In these cases, they are seen as respectable crimes. Other crimes like substance abuse, fights, theft, etc., are also commonly accepted. However, sexual crimes and child abuse are at the bottom of the hierarchy. Robbery and assault were not respected in the place I was in. Any crime that involves invading someone's home is considered bad, especially if the victim is an elderly woman. Murder largely depends on the circumstances. Killing someone who abused you as a child might earn respect, while killing someone over something trivial, like burning sausages on a barbecue, will not. It's not so much about respect, but more about fear. The two women in my section who were most respected were one who was in prison for assaulting a police officer, as her story suggested it was self-defense, and another who, along with 3 friends, beat up her girlfriend's boyfriend for abusing her. Story 15. I've been to prison several times, and most of what's been said is true, with some minor differences. The most respected crimes, or the ones that get the most violent reactions, are those committed against authority, police officers or guards. Those who control things on the outside usually maintain some level of control on the inside too, or earning a decent amount of respect. However, this depends on the place, as shown by the case of John Gotti, who still had to pay for protection because he didn't behave well when he was locked up. In general, the best policy is not to mess with children, whether you're headed to prison or not. Once inside, the key is to understand your surroundings and learn the prison's hierarchy. You need to read the environment quickly. All prisons are different, and not many people learn how to make body armor from magazines or fashion knives from cigarette filters before going to prison. Story 16. I've never been to prison, but I've spent a lot of time with people who have, and I've asked them these same questions, so I'll share what they told me. The crimes they hated are the obvious ones: sexual crimes, child abuse, and especially sexual crimes against children. If any of these crimes are on your record, other prisoners are literally forced by their leaders to attack you, and if they don't do it, someone else will, because disobedience is not tolerated. They operate this way because if they tell you to do something, you'd better do it or you'll be the target. And even though it's not technically a crime, everyone knows that being a snitch is the worst thing you can do. You'll be in a world of trouble with the other prisoners, and your best option is to keep it quiet, repent, and pray no one finds out that you've been snitching, or you'll be dead. As for respected crimes, there really aren't any, except maybe killing someone in defense of your family or loved ones. Bank robbers are somewhat respected, not because of the crime, but because their stories are fascinating and entertaining. This information comes from people who spent a lot of time in the California state prison system, and things may vary elsewhere, but I doubt sexual crimes against children are treated any differently anywhere in the world. Story 17. In Australia, there's a protection prison that houses all kinds of criminals. In this system, the most hated crimes are typically child abuse, child murder, and any crime related to minors. For the rest, crimes like raping women or committing other offenses sometimes don't raise as much disdain, as they can be seen as just another criminal. However, child abusers and murderers of children are universally despised. There are exceptions, though, and some of these criminals manage to form strong bonds with others and get along well with the general population. A common example would be a child killer who also deals drugs or smuggles contraband. After spending over 10 years in this system, the police may ignore you, but since it's a protection prison, many child sex offenders are housed there either openly or secretly. The open ones often connect with others of the same kind, making their time in prison relatively easy. The hidden ones, however, tend to act tough, get tattoos, and may even abuse or harass other sexual criminals. When they're discovered, they're transferred to a different unit. To add some excitement within the protection prison, there's even a protection unit in the already protection unit for the most dangerous criminals or those with severe mental illnesses. Within this unit, there's a strange social system where some are more popular than others. The more popular ones are often the most hated. A notable example is child killer Brett Peter Cowan, who works as the cook assistant. He's one of the most hated inmates and can't leave the unit. He tries to control things through harassment, but this plan often backfires when new prisoners are transferred in. He becomes a target once again, sparking a cycle of power struggles and egos. Then the crimes that gain respect in this prison are drug trafficking and bank robberies, especially if the crime is high profile and well publicized. Other crimes that are respected are those that require intelligence, like fraud and computer crimes. These prisoners are often interrogated, sometimes even to the point where they explain how they did it, and they're sometimes asked to give a kind of lesson on their methods. It's interesting. The authorities also use prison as an opportunity to make contacts and learn. Believe it or not, the system doesn't just handle incidents, it also teaches them how to avoid getting caught again. Story 18. My best friend was arrested at 18 years old because he and a friend tried to spend the night in an IKEA. In the end, they were caught by construction workers who called the police. It was a plan without any flaws, but they were just two teenagers causing mischief. They were treated as if they were dangerous criminals in a fun way. They even nicknamed them the most wanted criminals in our country. They took them to the police station in 2 different cars, and some motorized police escorted them once they were in prison. They kept up their legend and were treated really well. They had to stay overnight, and in the morning, they were allowed to go to the yard, but they were advised not to. My friend is extremely naive and thought, "Shit, I'm here for the rest of my life," so he went to the yard. The other inmates quickly realized what he had done because one of the guards made him run around to mess with them, and they treated him the same way the police had. Apparently, it was a pretty funny experience. The criminals had free rein to mess with a couple of kids who hadn't done anything serious, while the 2 clueless guys, in their innocence, thought they had ruined their lives. So, I guess the conclusion is, if you want respect, spending the night in IKEA seems like a good option. Well, people, that will be the last story for today. As always, if you liked it, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more videos. That's all for today. See you in the next video?